I never thought buying a cherry picker would turn into a legal nightmare. But here I am, standing in my driveway in Scottsdale, Arizona, looking at the very machine that started this whole mess. My name is Stephen Wagner, and I run a small tree trimming and exterior maintenance business. I'd saved up for years to buy my own cherry picker, a beautiful Genie S65 telescopic boom lift that set me back nearly $80,000. The thing was my pride and joy, my ticket to landing bigger contracts and finally making my business profitable after 3 years of scraping by with rental equipment. I bought my house in the Sunset Ridge community about 2 years before I got the cherry picker. Nice neighborhood, decent people, well-maintained streets. The HOA seemed reasonable enough at first. They mostly focused on keeping the lawns neat and making sure nobody painted their house neon green. Standard stuff that I could live with. The problem started on a Tuesday morning in March when I was loading my cherry picker onto its trailer to head to a job site. I just finished securing the chains when I heard the clicking of heels on asphalt behind me. "Excuse me, sir. Sir." I turned around to find a woman in her late 40s marching toward me with a leather-bound notebook clutched to her chest like a shield. She had that haircut, you know the one, where it's short in the back and somehow defies physics in the front. Her name tag read Karen Pemberton, HOA president. "Can I help you?" I asked, wiping grease off my hands with a rag. "I'm Karen Pemberton, the HOA president. I've been meaning to speak with you about that equipment you've been parking in your driveway." I glanced back at my cherry picker. "Is there a problem?" I checked the CC and Articus before I bought it. Nothing prohibits work vehicles as long as they're not commercial trucks over a certain weight. Karen's smile was tight and artificial. "Well, yes, technically, but several neighbors have expressed concerns about the appearance. However, that's not why I'm here this morning." "Okay, so what can I do for you?" "The HOA is organizing a community beautification project. We're repainting the decorative pillars at the main entrance and installing new lighting fixtures. We'll need to rent equipment to reach the top of the pillars. They're about 30 feet high." I nodded slowly, not sure where this was going. And then I remembered that you have this lovely cherry picker just sitting in your driveway. I was thinking, since you're part of the community, perhaps you'd like to volunteer its use for the project. It would only be for a day, maybe 2. We'd be very careful with it, of course. The request caught me off guard. "Madam, this is an $80,000 piece of equipment. It's how I make my living. I can't just lend it out." "Oh, but it's just sitting here when you're not using it, and this is for the community. Your community. Don't you want to contribute to making Sunset Ridge a more beautiful place to live?" "I do contribute. I pay my HOA dues like everyone else. But my equipment is my business. It requires special licensing to operate, it needs to be properly insured, and if something goes wrong—" "I understand your concerns," Karen interrupted, though her tone suggested she didn't. "But we're all neighbors here. We help each other out. That's what community means." "I appreciate that, but this isn't like borrowing a lawn mower. If someone gets hurt or damages the machine, we're talking about serious liability issues. Not to mention I have paying jobs scheduled. I can't have my equipment tied up for days when I need it for work." Karen's expression hardened. "I see. Well, that's disappointing. I thought you'd be more community-minded. I'll make a note of it." She turned on her heel and walked away, heels clicking angrily against the pavement. I stood there for a moment, wondering if I'd just made an enemy, but I pushed the thought aside. I had a job to do in temp and needed to get moving. Over the next few weeks, I noticed Karen driving past my house more frequently. She'd slow down, look at my cherry picker, and sometimes take photos with her phone. I tried to ignore it, but the attention made me uneasy. Then came the letters. The first one arrived in mid-April on official HOA letterhead. It stated that my cherry picker was creating an eyesore and needed to be moved to my backyard or removed from the property entirely. I read through my CC and Articus again, more carefully this time, and confirmed that I was fully within my rights. The rules stated that work vehicles under 10,000 pounds GVWR could be parked in driveways as long as they were maintained in good condition. My cherry picker qualified. I wrote a polite but firm response citing the specific sections of the CC and Articus and explaining that I was in full compliance. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The second letter came a week later, claiming that the cherry picker was a commercial vehicle and therefore prohibited. I responded with the manufacturer's specifications showing the weight classification. The third letter claimed it was a safety hazard. I provided my insurance documentation and licensing information. Each exchange took time and energy away from my business. I was spending more time drafting responses to Karen's letters than I was bidding on new jobs. My wife, Rachel, was getting worried about the stress it was causing. "Maybe you should just move it to the backyard," she suggested one evening over dinner. "Is it really worth all this hassle?" "It's the principle of it," I said. "I'm not violating any rules." "She's harassing me because I wouldn't let her use my equipment for free. If I back down now, she'll know she can push me around whenever she wants." Rachel sighed but nodded. She knew I was right. Even if she didn't like the conflict in early May, things escalated. I came home from a job to find a notice on my door stating that the HOA would be holding a special meeting to discuss violations and community standards. My name wasn't mentioned, but the date and time were highlighted, with a note that my attendance was strongly encouraged. I showed up to that meeting in the community center with my folder of documentation. About 40 people were scattered throughout the room, most of them looking bored or confused about why they'd been called there. Karen stood at the front with a PowerPoint presentation already loaded on the screen. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "We're here tonight to discuss some concerning trends in our community regarding property maintenance and community participation." For the next 20 minutes, she went through a slideshow that included photos of various properties with minor infractions. An overgrown hedge here, a trash can left out past collection time there. And then my cherry picker appeared on the screen, taking up the entire slide. "This piece of industrial equipment has been parked in a resident's driveway for months now. It's visible from the street. It's an eyesore, and it represents exactly the kind of commercial intrusion we created this HOA to prevent." "Excuse me," I said, standing up. "I'm the owner of that equipment, and I'd like to address some inaccuracies in your presentation." Karen's jaw tightened. "This isn't a debate, Mr. Wagner. This is an informational meeting." "Then let me provide some information. That cherry picker is fully compliant with our CC and Articus. It's under the weight limit, it's properly maintained, and it's legally parked. I've provided documentation of this to the HOA board multiple times." A woman I recognized from 3 houses down raised her hand. "I don't understand what the problem is. Steve runs a legitimate business." "The equipment looks fine to me. It's about maintaining our property values," Karen said. "If we allow one person to park commercial equipment in their driveway, where does it end? Next, we'll have panel vans and dump trucks everywhere." "That's a slippery slope fallacy," I said. "The CC and Articus clearly define what's allowed and what isn't. I'm within those boundaries." Several people nodded in agreement. I could see Karen losing control of the room. "Regardless," she said loudly, "the board will be reviewing the CC and Articus to address these loopholes." This meeting is adjourned. People filed out, several stopping to tell me they supported me. But I knew Karen wouldn't let this go. I just didn't realize how creative her next approach would be. 2 weeks later, she showed up at my door again. This time her demeanor was completely different, almost friendly. "Stephen, do you have a moment?" I was immediately suspicious but invited her in. Rachel offered coffee, which Karen accepted with exaggerated gratitude. "I want to apologize," Karen said once we were seated in the living room. "I've been under a lot of stress with the beautification project, and I let it affect my judgment. You were absolutely right. You're in compliance with the rules, and I shouldn't have pushed so hard." I glanced at Rachel, who looked as surprised as I felt. "I appreciate that, Karen. I understand wanting to keep the neighborhood nice. That's important to me too." "I'm glad you feel that way," she said, setting down her coffee cup, "because I have a proposal that might work for everyone." "What if, instead of asking you to volunteer your equipment, we actually hired you for the beautification project? We'd pay you a fair rate for your time and the use of your cherry picker. You'd handle all the operation, so there'd be no liability issues for us, and we'd get the project done with local talent rather than bringing in an outside contractor." It actually sounded reasonable, too reasonable, which made me wary. But the idea of getting paid for a local job that wouldn't require much travel time was appealing. "What kind of rate were you thinking?" I asked. "Well, we'd need you for probably 2 full days. The HOA has budgeted $3,000 for equipment rental and labor. Would that work?" I did the math in my head. $1,500 a day for the work she was describing seemed fair, maybe even slightly generous. What exactly would the job entail? She pulled out her phone and showed me photos of the entrance pillars. They were decorative brick columns about 30 feet high with light fixtures that needed replacing and caps that needed repainting. Straightforward work. "I'd need to see the site and get all the details in writing," I said. "But if the scope is what you're describing, that rate would work." "Wonderful," Karen beamed. "Let me draw up a contract and we'll get this scheduled." Rachel walked Karen to the door, and once she was gone, my wife turned to me with a concerned expression. "That seemed too easy." "I know," I said. "But if she's actually willing to hire me properly, maybe we can put all this behind us." The contract arrived 3 days later via email. I read through it carefully. It specified the work to be done, the timeline, and the payment terms. Everything looked standard. I signed it and sent it back. We scheduled the work for a Saturday in late May. I arrived at the community entrance at 7 in the morning with my cherry picker ready to go. Karen was there with 2 other board members, along with someone I didn't recognize holding a professional camera. "This is Marcus," Karen said, gesturing to the photographer. "He's documenting the project for our community newsletter." That should have been my first warning sign, but I was focused on getting the job done. I spent the morning replacing light fixtures on all 4 entrance pillars. The work went smoothly. The weather was perfect, not too hot yet, and the equipment performed flawlessly. Karen kept checking on me every 30 minutes or so, always with that same artificial smile. "How's it going? Do you need anything? Water? Snacks?" "I'm good, thanks," I said each time, wishing she'd just let me work. By noon, I'd finished the light fixtures and was ready to start on the repainting. That's when Karen approached with her clipboard. "Stephen, we've been thinking. Since you're already here with the equipment set up, would you mind taking care of a few additional items? The decorative metalwork on the pillars could use some touch-up paint, and there are a few landscaping lights in the median that need adjusting." "That wasn't in the contract," I said. "The additional work would cost more." Her smile faltered. "But you're already here. It would only take a few extra minutes." "Karen, those few extra minutes add up. And scope creep is how projects go over budget and over schedule." If you want additional work done, we need to amend the contract and discuss the additional cost." "Fine," she said, her voice tight again. "Let's just stick to the original agreement then." I continued with the repainting, but I noticed Karen talking intensely with the other board members, gesturing toward me. The photographer kept taking pictures, way more than seemed necessary for a newsletter article. I finished the job by 4 in the afternoon, loaded up my equipment, and submitted my invoice through the HOA's online portal as specified in the contract. Payment was due within 30 days. A week later, I got an email from Karen. My stomach dropped as I read it. "Dear Mr. Wagner, after reviewing your invoice and comparing it to market rates for similar services, the HOA board has determined that your charges are excessive. We have found that we could have hired a professional contractor with a cherry picker for $1,500 total, not $3,000. Additionally, your rate of $1,500 per day is not in line with standard equipment rental rates in the Phoenix metropolitan area. Therefore, we are adjusting your payment to $800, which we feel is fair compensation for the work performed. Please expect a check for this amount within the standard payment time frame." I read the email 3 times, my anger building with each pass. They were trying to change the agreed-upon rate after the work was done. This was exactly the kind of thing that kept small contractors from making a decent living. I called my lawyer that same day. His name was Jeff Morrison, and he'd helped me set up my business initially. I explained the situation and forwarded him all the documentation. "This is pretty clear-cut," Jeff said. "You have a signed contract. They can't unilaterally change the terms after you've performed the work. Send them a formal demand letter citing the contract. If they don't pay within the time frame specified, we can file a lawsuit." I drafted the demand letter with Jeff's help and sent it certified mail. Karen's response came back within 2 days, and it was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive bureaucratic nonsense. The HOA claimed that I had misrepresented my rates and that a fair market analysis showed I was overcharging the community. They also claimed that the quality of work was substandard and that they were considering seeking compensation for necessary corrections. This was when I decided to change tactics. If Karen wanted to play hardball, I could play too. But I'd play smart. I did some research and discovered something interesting. The union scale rate for operating a boom lift in Arizona, according to the International Union of Operating Engineers Local 428, was significantly higher than what I'd charged the HOA. We were talking about $89 per hour for the operator, plus equipment rental rates that ranged from $400 to $600 per day, depending on the size of the lift. For 2 days of work, the union scale would have been well over $4,000, maybe closer to $5,000 when you factored in everything properly. I'd actually given them a discount. I also dug into HOA law in Arizona. I discovered that HOAs are required to follow their own contractual agreements, and that any changes to payment terms must be mutually agreed upon in writing. Unilateral changes after work is performed can constitute breach of contract and, in some cases, fraud. Armed with this information, I sent another email to Karen, copying all the board members and using my lawyer's email address in the CC line. "Dear HOA board members, I have reviewed your assertion that my rates are excessive. After consulting with industry professionals and reviewing union scale rates, I have determined that my original invoice was actually below market rate. The standard union scale for this type of work in Arizona is approximately $89 per hour for a certified operator, plus equipment rental costs. For the 16 hours of work I performed, The union rate would be $1,424 in labor alone, plus equipment fees of $1,000 to $1,200, bringing the total to approximately $2,500 to $2,700, and that's being conservative. However, I am willing to honor our original contract of $3,000 as agreed. I expect full payment within the contractually specified time frame, or I will be forced to pursue legal action. Additionally, if the HOA wishes to contest the contract, I am prepared to revise my invoice to reflect true union scale rates, which would increase the amount owed to approximately $4,800 for the complete scope of work performed. I hit send and waited. The response came from a different board member this time, a man named Robert Chen who I'd seen at the meeting but hadn't spoken to directly. Mr. Wagner, I think there's been a misunderstanding and miscommunication. I've reviewed the contract and your invoice. Everything appears to be in order. I'll be bringing this to the full board at our next meeting with a recommendation for immediate payment. Please accept my apologies for this confusion. I felt a small surge of victory, but it was premature, because Karen wasn't done. The next Saturday, I was working on a client's property in Paradise Valley when my phone started blowing up with text messages. They were from neighbors in my HOA. "Hey man, what's going on with your house? Steve, there's a tow truck in front of your place. The HOA has someone trying to tow your cherry picker." I called Rachel immediately. "What's happening?" "I don't know," she said, and I could hear the stress in her voice. "A tow truck showed up about 10 minutes ago. The driver says he has authorization from the HOA to remove unauthorized commercial equipment from the property. I told him he can't do that, but he keeps saying he has paperwork. Don't let him touch anything. I'm calling the police right now. I'll be there as soon as I can." I called 911 and explained the situation, then called my client to apologize and explain that I had an emergency. Thankfully, they were understanding. I jumped in my truck and broke several speed limits getting home. By the time I arrived, there were 2 Scottsdale PD cruisers in front of my house, the tow truck, and a small crowd of neighbors. Karen was there too, arguing with one of the officers. "I'm the property owner," I said, approaching the officer who appeared to be in charge. "What's going on?" "Mr. Wagner?" the officer asked. I nodded. "This lady claims to represent your HOA and says that piece of equipment is illegally parked and needs to be removed. The tow truck driver has a work order but no legal documentation authorizing the removal of your property." "That equipment is legally parked on my property," I said. "I have all the documentation showing compliance with the HOA rules." Karen jumped in. "The board voted to update the CC and Articus. Commercial equipment is no longer permitted in driveways." "When did this vote happen?" I asked. "Last week. We sent out an email notification. CC and Articus can't be changed unilaterally by the board," the officer said. "That requires a vote of the homeowners, and there's a specific legal process. Do you have documentation of a proper vote?" Karen's face went red. "The board has the authority to enforce community standards, but not to change the governing documents without following proper procedures," I said. I pulled out my phone and showed the officer my saved copies of the CC and Articus. "These are the rules that were in place when I bought my house and when I purchased this equipment. There's been no official vote to change them." The officer turned to the tow truck driver. "I'm sorry, but you can't remove this property without proper legal authorization. If there's a civil dispute here, it needs to be resolved through the courts, not self-help." The driver shrugged and started packing up his gear. Karen was practically shaking with anger. "This isn't over," she said to me. "You're in violation and the HOA will take appropriate action." If you attempt to remove my property again without legal authorization, I'll file charges for attempted theft," I said calmly. "And I'll be filing a harassment complaint with the police today documenting this incident." The officers took statements from everyone and gave me a case number. As they were leaving, one of them pulled me aside. "Look, I don't normally get involved in HOA disputes. They're usually civil matters, but this lady seems to have it out for you. Document everything. Every interaction, every letter, every email. If this escalates to stalking or harassment, that evidence will be crucial." I thanked him and went inside to comfort Rachel, who was badly shaken by the whole thing. Several neighbors stopped by over the next few hours to express their support and disbelief at what had happened. That evening, I wrote a detailed complaint to the HOA board, copying everyone, documenting the attempted towing and explaining that Karen's actions constituted harassment and potentially criminal behavior. I also sent a copy to my lawyer. Jeff called me the next morning. "This is escalating beyond a simple contract dispute. I think you need to consider getting a restraining order if this behavior continues. The attempted towing, especially without legal authorization, is a serious matter." "I don't want to inflame things more than necessary," I said. "But I'm not going to be bullied." "Understood. Let's see how they respond to your complaint. In the meantime, I'm drafting a more formal cease and desist letter regarding the harassment." The HOA's check for the full $3,000 arrived 2 days later with no explanation or apology. But the money wasn't the victory I thought it would be, because the real battle was just beginning. Karen's next move was to call for a special election to recall the other board members and change the CC and Articus. She sent out a massive email campaign to all the homeowners, claiming that the community was under assault from commercial interests and that property values were at risk. She included photos of my cherry picker, my work truck, and even my trailer. She made it sound like I was running a construction yard out of my driveway, which was absurd. The equipment was neatly parked and well maintained, but her campaign was effective. She scared a lot of people who didn't know the full story. Within a week, she'd gathered enough signatures to force a special meeting and vote on changing the CC and Articus. I spent the next few weeks mounting my own campaign. I went door to door talking to neighbors, explaining the situation, showing them the documentation. I explained that if the HOA could arbitrarily change the rules to target one person, they could do it to anyone. "Today it's my work equipment," I told them. "Tomorrow it could be your boat, your RV, your home business. The rules exist to protect all of us, and they should only be changed through proper procedures, not because one person has a personal vendetta." The special meeting was held in early July, and the community center was packed. There must have been 200 people there, the biggest turnout anyone had seen in years. Karen gave her presentation first, full of dramatic language about property values and community character. Then it was my turn. I kept it simple and factual. I explained my business, showed how my equipment compliance with existing rules, documented Karen's harassment campaign, and explained the attempted towing incident. I also pointed out that the proposed changes to the CC and Articus would affect far more than just me. The new language Karen is proposing would prohibit any vehicle over a certain size, any equipment visible from the street, and any home-based business that requires specialized tools or supplies. That means the contractor 3 streets over who parks his van in his driveway would have to move it. The mobile dog groomer on Sagaro Drive would be in violation. The handyman on Cactus Road who parks his trailer behind his gate would need to find off-site storage. This isn't about maintaining standards. This is about one person using the HOA as a weapon because she didn't get her way. The room erupted in discussion. People were arguing, pointing, talking over each other. The board president, who'd replaced Karen temporarily, trying to call for order. When the vote finally happened, the proposed changes were defeated by a margin of almost 2-1. Karen's recall motion also failed. She stood up, face flushed, and stormed out of the meeting. I thought it was finally over. I was wrong. In August, I started noticing that my business was losing clients. 2 canceled contracts with vague explanations. A third said they decided to go with a different contractor. When I pressed for reasons, they were evasive. Then a potential client called me directly. "Hey, I was planning to hire you for a job, but I got a weird call from someone claiming to be a former client. She said your work was shoddy and that you overcharge. Normally, I'd ignore that kind of thing, but she knew specific details about your business. I wanted to hear your side before making a decision." My blood ran cold. What was her name? She didn't give one. Just said she was a concerned resident who'd worked with you before and wanted to warn people. I explained the situation with the HOA, provided references, and ultimately kept that client. But I knew Karen was making other calls. I just couldn't prove it. I brought it up with Jeff. "Is there anything I can do about this?" Interfering with someone's business can constitute tortious interference, but it's hard to prove without evidence. "Can you document any of these calls?" I started asking clients who mentioned hearing negative things about me to record any future calls if they got them. I also set up a Google alert for my business name and started monitoring online review sites obsessively. That's when I found it. Someone using the name Concerned Neighbor had left 1-star reviews on 3 different platforms, all posted within the same hour, all using similar language about overcharging and poor work quality. The reviews violated the terms of service because the person hadn't actually used my services. I reported them and got them taken down, but the damage was done. My business's rating had dropped, and I was spending more time dealing with reputation management than actually working. In September, things took an even darker turn. I came home to find my cherry picker had been vandalized. Someone had slashed the hydraulic lines and poured something into the fuel tank. The damage was extensive, over $15,000 worth. I called the police immediately. The responding officer took photos and statements, but there were no witnesses and no security camera footage. My insurance would cover most of the damage, but I'd still be out my deductible and the income from jobs I couldn't complete while it was being repaired. "You have any idea who might have done this?" the officer asked. I explained the situation with Karen and the HOA. "I can't prove anything, but the timing is suspicious. We'll investigate, but without evidence or witnesses, it's going to be difficult." I installed security cameras the next day, covering every angle of my property. I also filed for a restraining order against Karen, citing the pattern of harassment, the business interference, and the suspicious timing of the vandalism. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for late September. Karen showed up with her own lawyer, a sharp-dressed man who argued that I was harassing his client by making unfounded accusations. I presented my evidence: the emails, the attempted towing, witness statements about her campaign against me, the suspicious reviews, and the timeline of escalating incidents. The judge reviewed everything carefully. "Miss Pemberton, have you had any contact with Mr. Wagner outside of official HOA business since the special election in July?" "No, Your Honor," she said. "I've been avoiding him specifically to avoid any accusations of harassment. And yet his business has been negatively affected by anonymous actions that seem targeted specifically at him. Mr. Wagner, Do you have any direct evidence that Miss Pemberton is responsible for the vandalism or the negative reviews? Not direct evidence, Your Honor, but the pattern is clear. The judge sighed. I understand your frustration, Mr. Wagner, but I can't issue a restraining order based on suspicion and circumstantial evidence. However, Miss Pemberton, I'm warning you now. If any further incidents occur, and if there's any evidence connecting you to them, I will revisit this matter. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Karen said, looking satisfied. I left the courthouse feeling defeated but not broken. I knew Karen was behind everything, and I knew she'd slip up eventually. I just had to be patient and vigilant. The breakthrough came in October from an unexpected source. Robert Chen, the board member who'd helped resolve the payment dispute, called me one evening. Stephen, can we meet somewhere private? I have information you need to hear, but I can't do this over the phone or anywhere public. We met at a coffee shop in Tempe, far from our neighborhood. Robert looked nervous, constantly glancing around. I'm resigning from the board, he said. I can't be part of this anymore. Karen has been using HOA resources to go after you, and it's escalated beyond anything I'm comfortable with. What do you mean? He pulled out his phone and showed me screenshots. Emails between Karen and other board members discussing strategies to drive out my business. Text messages about finding loopholes in the CC and Articus. And most damning, a text conversation between Karen and someone named Jennifer discussing teaching Wagner a lesson he won't forget, dated 2 days before my equipment was vandalized. Who's Jennifer? I asked. Jennifer Hartley. She's Karen's sister, lives 2 towns over. She's not part of the HOA, but Karen's been confiding in her throughout this whole thing. Can I have copies of these? That's why I'm here, Robert said. But I need you to understand something. If you use these, it's going to blow up the entire HOA board. There will be lawsuits, investigations, the whole thing. I'm willing to testify about what I've seen, but you need to be prepared for the fallout. I'm prepared, I said. This has gone on long enough. I took the screenshots to Jeff the next morning. He reviewed them with an increasingly grave expression. This is evidence of conspiracy and potentially criminal harassment. The text about teaching you a lesson right before the vandalism is particularly damaging. We need to take this to the police immediately. We filed a supplemental report with the Scottsdale PD, including all the new evidence. The detective assigned to the case, Detective Sarah Morrison, took the matter much more seriously once she saw the communications. We'll need to verify the authenticity of these messages and get official records through subpoena, she said. But if this checks out, we're looking at potential charges for conspiracy, vandalism, and criminal damage. The investigation took 6 weeks. During that time, I kept my head down, focused on my business, and let the legal system work. Karen must have known something was happening because she went quiet. No more emails, no more letters, no more incidents. In late November, Detective Morrison called me. We've completed our investigation. We were able to verify the text messages and found additional evidence on Jennifer Hartley's phone. We're moving forward with charges. Karen Pemberton and Jennifer Hartley were arrested on December 3rd. The charges included conspiracy to commit vandalism, criminal damage to property, and harassment. The Scottsdale Police Department press release made local news, and suddenly, I was getting calls from reporters wanting to know about the HOA vendetta case. I declined most interviews, but I did agree to speak with one local investigative reporter who'd been covering HOA abuse cases. The story aired in January and went viral online. Suddenly, my case was being discussed on HOA reform forums and neighborhood association websites across the country. The legal proceedings moved slowly, as they always do. Karen's lawyer tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing that the text messages were taken out of context and that there was no proof Karen knew about the vandalism in advance. But the prosecutor had more evidence than just the texts. Jennifer had bragged to friends about helping her sister deal with a problem neighbor. One of those friends, feeling guilty, had come forward and provided testimony. There was also traffic camera footage showing Jennifer's car in the vicinity of my neighborhood on the night of the vandalism. In March, faced with mounting evidence, both Karen and Jennifer accepted plea deals. Karen pleaded guilty to conspiracy and harassment. Jennifer pleaded guilty to criminal damage. Karen was sentenced to 1 year of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay full restitution for the damage to my equipment, including my deductible and lost income. She was also permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership position. Jennifer received a similar sentence, but with a heavier focus on restitution since she'd actually committed the vandalism. But the legal victory was only part of the resolution. The HOA itself was in chaos. 3 board members, including the president who'd been elected after Karen, resigned. An emergency election was held, and a completely new board was installed, made up of people who were committed to reform and transparency. One of the new board's first actions was to issue a formal apology to me on behalf of the HOA. They also implemented new policies limiting the board's power to harass residents and requiring board votes to be recorded and published for transparency. My business recovered. The negative reviews had been removed, and the publicity from the case, ironically, brought me new clients. People liked the story of a small business owner standing up to bullying, and I got contracts from clients specifically saying they wanted to support someone who hadn't backed down. In May, a year after the beautification project that started everything, the new HOA board approached me with a proposal. They wanted to hire me again, this time to do maintenance work on several community areas. The rate they offered was actually higher than what I'd charged before, and they were meticulous about putting everything in writing. I accepted the job, not because I needed to prove anything, but because it felt like a genuine fresh start. The work went smoothly, the board was professional and appreciative, and I was paid promptly and without any dispute. Rachel and I talked about moving after everything that happened. The stress had taken its toll on both of us, and there were moments when I wondered if staying in Sunset Ridge was worth it. But ultimately, we decided to stay. This was our home. We'd built a life here, made friends here, and I wasn't going to let one person's vendetta drive us away. The cherry picker still sits in my driveway. I upgraded the security system and added motion-activated lighting, but it's there, right where it's always been, fully compliant with all HOA rules. Every time I see it, I'm reminded of what I learned through this whole ordeal. Standing up for yourself matters. Documentation matters. Following the rules matters, but so does knowing when the rules are being weaponized against you. And sometimes, patience and persistence pay off more than immediate confrontation. I also learned about the importance of community. The neighbors who supported me, who testified about the attempted towing, who came to the meetings and voted against Karen's overreach, they made all the difference. Without them, I would have been fighting alone. The case became something of a cautionary tale in HOA circles. I've been contacted by several homeowners facing similar situations, asking for advice. My answer is always the same. Document everything, know your rights, don't be afraid to get legal help, and remember that you're not alone. Karen moved out of Sunset Ridge 6 months after her sentencing. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she relocated to New Mexico to live near her daughter. I hope she learned something from the experience, though I'm not optimistic. Some people never accept responsibility for their actions. As for me, my business is thriving. I hired 2 employees last year, and I'm looking at expanding my services. The cherry picker that caused so much trouble has more than paid for itself, and I'm considering buying a second one. Last month, I was working on a job in Phoenix when the property manager asked if I did work for HOAs. I laughed and told him I did, but that he should probably check references carefully. When he asked why, I gave him the short version of my story. "So you're that guy," he said. "I saw the news story. Good for you for fighting back. Most people would have just backed down." "I thought about it," I admitted. "But sometimes you have to draw a line. This was mine." The HOA at Sunset Ridge is running smoothly now. The new board is responsive, fair, and focused on actual community improvement rather than petty power plays. They've implemented quarterly town halls where residents can voice concerns, and they've published clear guidelines for how disputes should be handled. I even joined a committee focused on updating the community's landscaping. It seemed like a good way to contribute positively and stay involved. Plus, it gives me a voice in decisions that affect my property and my business. Looking back, I can see how things could have gone differently at several points. If I just moved the cherry picker to the backyard when Karen first complained, none of this would have happened. If I'd backed down on the payment dispute, maybe the escalation could have been avoided. If I'd moved out of the neighborhood when things got rough, the stress would have ended. But I also know that backing down teaches bullies that their tactics work. It empowers them to target the next person who doesn't comply with their demands. By standing my ground, I didn't just protect myself. I protected future residents from similar abuse. The story has a strange epilogue. Last month, I received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note on plain paper. "Mr. Wagner, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about everything. The way I treated you was inexcusable, and I let my ego and my anger turn me into someone I don't recognize. You were right to fight back, and I deserved the consequences. I hope you've been able to move past what happened and that your business is doing well. I'm working on being a better person, though I know that doesn't undo the harm I caused. I'm sorry." It wasn't signed, but I recognized the handwriting from the dozens of HOA letters I'd received. Karen had finally, in her own way, taken responsibility. I showed the letter to Rachel. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think people sometimes need to hit rock bottom before they can change," she said. "Maybe this was hers. Should I respond? Do you want to?" I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to write back, to acknowledge the apology, maybe even to forgive. But another part of me knew that some chapters need to close completely. I filed the letter away with all the other documentation from the case. Not as evidence, but as a reminder. A reminder that conflict can bring out the worst in people, but also that people can change. A reminder that standing up for yourself has costs, but also rewards. A reminder that community matters, but so does protecting your rights. My cherry picker stands in the driveway today, gleaming in the Arizona sun. It's more than just a piece of equipment now. It's a symbol of resilience, of refusing to be pushed around, of knowing your worth and standing by it. And every time I fire it up for a job, extending that boom toward the sky, I think about how one simple machine became the focal point of a year-long battle that tested everything I believed about fairness, community, and justice. The HOA demanded I share it. Then they complained when I charged fair rates. But in the end, they learned that small business owners have rights too, and that contracts mean something, and that harassment has consequences. I'm Stephen Wagner. I run a tree trimming business in Scottsdale, Arizona, and this is the story of how I fought back against an HOA that tried to destroy my livelihood because I wouldn't let them push me around. It wasn't easy. It wasn't fun. But it was necessary, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because sometimes the cost of peace is too high. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's exhausting, even when you're not sure you'll win. And sometimes, just sometimes, standing your ground changes not just your own situation, but creates ripples that make things better for everyone who comes after you. That's what I hope this story does. I hope it encourages other people facing similar situations to document their interactions, to know their rights, to seek help when they need it, and to never, ever back down when they are in the right. The cherry picker is just a machine. But what it represents, that fight for fairness and dignity and the right to earn an honest living, that's something worth protecting. And in the end, despite everything that happened, despite the stress and the cost and the fear, I'm glad I fought back. Because now, when I drive through the entrance of Sunset Ridge, past those pillars I helped beautify, I can hold my head high knowing that I stood up for myself, for my business, and for every other small business owner who's ever been pushed around by someone with a little bit of power and a lot of bad intentions. And that's worth more than all the cherry pickers in the world.